So welcome everyone to the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology's Expert Series webcast. Today we have one of my favorite kinds of programs where you see clients and outside lawyers together. You get the expertise of the outside lawyer and the practical day-to-day reaction to that expertise from the in-house lawyer. So today, we start with Baker McKenzie and Cynthia Cole. Any of you that have been with me for other programs, you've seen Cynthia quite a bit. So Cynthia is now the global head of all data. Can I just make you global head of the firm, Cynthia? It's a title almost as impressive, but probably less maddening. I think if I've got to look at the whole thing. So she's chair of Baker McKenzie's Global Commercial Tech and Transactions Business Unit. So what you're getting here is U.S. expertise, but also global expertise, and a lot of repetitions, not only in her own work, but within a global law firm. So with her, we have Joy Johns. Joy, this is your first time with us, so thank you for joining us. Joy is the Deputy and Senior Counsel of Global Data Protection and Cybersecurity at Eaton, overseeing a pretty robust set of risks and an interesting set of solutions. So I'm really looking forward to having you discuss kind of the business aspect of data. People talk about just the implementation, what do you do? But when you start looking at issues around mergers and acquisitions, strategic transactions, I think a lot of people are beginning to realize that data can actually be a serious impediment to these deals, and actually isn't something you just deal with at the end of the negotiations. It comes in the beginning. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the two of you and listen for a chance to learn. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Wayne.
Thanks, Wayne. And thanks, Joy, for joining me here. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I live it on a daily basis. So, we have a lot to say. But again, so the topic is data privacy and security in M&A and strategic transactions. And it's a playbook, right, for managing data opportunities and risks, right, in strategic transactions. And I'm super excited to be here with Joy. So I think the first question maybe let me go through the agenda. Sorry. So we'll do a quick intro, which we've done. We've outlined this. We've tried to keep the slides light, but that doesn't mean the commentary and the stories and the experience is light, right? We just really want this to be a dialogue, which it will be with Joy, on how we look at the transaction, how we sort of tee things up, how we work through issues, how we allocate, mitigate privacy risks, and then integration, which is something that many people fail to account for. And the best time to account for that is in the middle of or is at the beginning if you can. But definitely once you've started to understand the risks and the opportunities, and then you can really put a solid integration plan in place. And frankly, it's better to do that before close. So the first question that I have for Joy is, how can you communicate to the business side what data is important?
Yeah, great question, Cynthia. So this is something that I've been living and breathing lately in my current practice, but I've seen throughout. So even when the deal isn't data centric, data is still very important. I think as we become more digitally enabled in all industries, not just the tech space and innovation, it's important to understand how data can be a value chain and an asset to the company. So it's not just those kind of technology deals where you really need to consider data. I always tell my business clients, think about the things that are coming with the target, right? So if you have customer data, obviously, that can be an asset, can help you in certain business decisions and strategic decisions there. Employee and HR data is obviously very important to maintaining a good working environment and assessing employee performance and making strategic decisions there. And then on the other side of things, and you'll see it on the right side of the slide there, there's all types of different data that come with sensitivity, security restrictions, third-party data that you could maybe leverage in a value chain, and different types of data transactions that will be enabled during the business relationship. So I try to make sure that my business clients understand that data can be an asset, even if it's not centric to the deal, but also, maybe the 10,000 foot view, right? Let's not think of data as just this key core asset that we could use in a business relationship, but really think about how it can impact what you're asking for during the business relationship and in terms of why you're pursuing this target or pursuing this transaction. So can definitely change some of the decisions. But again, data is such a broad space. So I kind of, it's specific to what the value, I think, is specific to what you're looking for in the business transaction. But at a high level, these are the things that I kind of always see, no matter what type of deal it is.
Yeah. And I would say, I find sometimes that people fail to recognize that there is even data at the center of the transaction, which sounds silly to say, honestly, in 2025. But, I remember a time when we didn't even have, we'll talk about this more later, but we didn't even have specific reps and warranties with respect to, data and data privacy and security compliance. And we certainly didn't have, now we have checklists and questions, right, to sort of tee up transactions that are designed to get to the core of what the data is. But we still, which again, we did not have 10 years ago. So, but I think the other issue is that, like to Joy's point, it's a high level, you have to get down into the weeds a little bit, but the questions should be high level, like understanding the revenue, right? And how the target, and yourselves makes money, or how you intend to optimize the target, right? Whatever you're acquiring post-transaction, post-close. And I think those are questions that people will understand, from a business perspective or an engineering or a product, or a business unit, but they won't necessarily associate it with the kind of data that is incumbent in the value that target and that company has created. And so helping them getting in early and being a part of the LOI stage if you can, right? And
that's always the key, if you can.
Let's be serious. Okay, let's be honest. That's probably not going to happen, but you're going to try. You're going to try.
Yes. We are constantly trying, and having to educate, there are certain business units that I may have never worked with before for any sort of transaction or strategic partnership. And it is kind of starting all over at the beginning, kind of explaining data, like you said, how it fits into the strategic decision making and the value streams for that business. It's all, it doesn't, just because you explain it once doesn't mean that you're like, okay, now we're covered in every deal. They should know exactly what to do. So it's a constant wheel of information.
Yes. Wow. And that's pretty profound, frankly, Joy, right? It's like you think that you say something once and people retain it. And if you happen to be a parent, that's not true with your children. And I'm not saying that you should treat your coworkers like children, but it's just an example of the fact that saying things, this information is meant to be repeated, right? And you can repeat it in different forms. And again, it just begs we talk about this a lot, like getting close to your clients, your internal clients, right? If you're an in-house attorney, and understanding what is driving their decision making and being on their short list of people to call with questions, and that they reach out to you, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's a perfect segue to the next point of data as a liability as well, because not only do you need to educate your clients on data as an asset and considering, how can we leverage data in ways that we may not have thought of before, but especially in the diligence, portion of any deal, right? Liability is something that you're always evaluating. And I think it can be difficult for individuals who are not, I'm a privacy lawyer, cybersecurity lawyer. I live and breathe this every day. Same with Cynthia. But there are other lawyers that really don't touch this space unless they're working with, another legal team or on another deal. So again, the education piece really comes into play. A lot of times, you have a tight deadline for diligence, and you may have a limit on questions that you can ask. So to Cynthia's point, you want to keep things high level enough that it doesn't seem as burdensome or, not necessary, but you want to make sure that you're getting enough information to initially evaluate and then maybe go deeper once you can, right? So absolutely figuring out the type of data that's at issue, any sort of security or management obligations are extremely important. For instance, if you are a manufacturer and you are acquiring a manufacturer that's a government contractor, you may be dealing with more sensitive data than you imagined or dealt with before. There might be different government controls and requirements that you have to consider, and those things obviously take resources and should be considered an evaluation. If you're going to have to set up separate systems for a new business because of the type of data that's coming with the business, even though you're a manufacturing industry, in the manufacturing industry, that is something that, the business needs to be aware of, the deal team needs to be aware of, so that we can make sure that we have the appropriate protections in place, and also just pointing out those additional resources and how they might change the valuation. I think, there's always a little bit of sensitivity into personal data and how much you need and what you're collecting. So those are things to be mindful of as well. There have been many situations in different states with differing privacy laws, but for an example, Illinois with their biometric law, right? If you're acquiring a business or strategic partnership in Illinois and you're all of a sudden thinking about, oh, we use biometrics, right? That's something that needs to come out in diligence, because if it doesn't, down the line, you may be on the hook for, a BIPA lawsuit. So you wanna make sure that you're asking kind of these high level questions, starting at what data is at issue, what are you collecting? And then to Cynthia's point earlier, figuring out, well, then does this deal make sense if we have to put in all of these additional resources, or do we want to change kind of the business strategy behind this relationship that we're pursuing?
Yeah. No, that's right. And a couple things come to mind. I think no question is a dumb question in this space. And to your biometric point, right? Oftentimes companies are using biometrics in the way that they manage employees.
Right.
And so it has nothing to do with what the company does, right? Or sort of what their revenue generation, sort of policies are, or what they're doing with respect to data. It's a part of how they run their business. And I find that oftentimes clients or companies are very focused on how are they using data? Oh, but they're not it's a manufacturing company, or, they're not a social media company. So they're not really collecting. No. Hold on. Right. So it's just don't assume, ask the question. And again, it doesn't have to be a loaded question, but it is an important question to Joy's point, which is to your earlier point, which is the risk, especially in that, you know, context is great, right? With respect to liabilities and fines.
Right.
And the other question I get a lot is, well, it's an asset purchase, and so we're going to leave all the liabilities behind. You know, we're not going to take on any of the liabilities. And I say, well, okay, let's put a pin in that for a second, and let's try to understand the crux of this, which is that sure, you can put all the liability behind if you leave the data behind, but if you're bringing the data with you, you have also incurred a fresh set potentially of, you know, compliance issues with respect to that data, because the data now belongs to you and it's in your possession and you're using it, and maybe it was unlawfully obtained, or maybe the way you transferred it in the transaction, you know, you didn't do it correctly. So again, I think, you know, this is not an area where many of the sort of traditional ways to cabin liability work, right? And so again, it's making sure that you communicate, that you're getting the information you need. And it's never you know, I've never seen a transaction not go forward because the liability on the data was so high.
Right.
So there are always ways to work around it, and to figure out the right sort of ratio of, you know, but again, it should be part of a larger conversation, and it's better to know
Right.
what you're taking on.
Yeah, absolutely. And adjust the plan accordingly, right? Like we're going to talk about, you know, kind of integration and post-closing. There are things that you can find out in this stage that you can easily fix, right? At that point.
Yeah.
You know, so it doesn't have to be you know, the red flag or the stopgap for the deal, but just something to be aware of, and then you can plan accordingly. I think too, you know, a lot of times I'll have either my colleagues in different areas of the legal organization or even business clients through my career have asked like, well, like, does this actually matter? Or, you know, do we need to spend a lot of time on this if we're not, you know, like you said, Cynthia, if we're not taking any of the liabilities. And I'm like, that's a great dream to have. And I wish that's how it worked. But again, it's this kind of strategic decision of, oh, well, we don't actually even need that, right? So let's leave that piece of the business here and let's continue on with, you know, whatever path they decide. So lots of education, lots of conversations. But again, the earlier the better, so you can plan for it, right?
Yes, that's right.
And you know, I think unresolved risk, you know, we kind of talked about this. We definitely don't want to stall negotiations or prevent the closing. So it's good to, one, be upfront about kind of the high level questions that you have, and prepare the business that you have these questions, right? And that maybe you'll have some follow up. One of the things that I found really helpful is, instead of just sending over, you know, my list of questions or telling, you know, whoever is leading the deal from the legal side and the business side, like, here are the things we have to target. If I could set up just a quick call with whoever is, you know, kind of under the tent that may know some of these answers, very high level. We're not getting into technical specifics here. It can be very quick. It can provide a lot of information. And then it gives you an opportunity to, you know, follow up right there, right? You don't have to send another request and kind of wait. So that's something that I've been trying to do more and more often, in terms of, I don't want to stall negotiations. I don't want to, you know, add to the files that are going over, because there's a lot in these types of situations. But that's worked out really well for me. And it might be a representative of their legal team. It might be their lawyers, their outside counsel, like whoever is able to provide kind of that high level information. It's been like a quick and easy process for me to get those key points that I need to start making an initial assessment.
Yeah, and I would say, yeah, I agree. And I think those conversations are really important because you can get a sense very quickly of where, let's say you're on the buy side, you get a sense very quickly when you ask, frankly, very benign questions like, who drafted your privacy statement? I've heard some good ones like, the summer intern, or we borrowed it from our most important partner. We thought they had a really good one. And so we just, put our name on it. I mean, and look, that's okay, right? Like it's manageable, but you get a sense when you get answers like that, right? You get a sense pretty quickly of just what their posture is.
Exactly.
Um, and I've had questions sometimes come back where we ask security questions, right? Like, have you done pen testing, or, what were the results of different security assessments? And we get the results and they're not great, right? Which is, the value of those assessments. But so we'll get the assessments back, and then, other lawyers on the team will say, oh my gosh, it's awful. They had, a bad sort of result in the security assessment. And I say, well, look, it's actually not a bad thing. One, they actually went through the process of doing it, right? Which is a good thing. And really the question that matters now is, did they take the steps that were recommended to do the cleanup? Because
Yes.
I'd much rather see that, right, than a company that comes and says, nope, we've never had any problems and everything is great. And, because that's just not true, right?
Right.
And so, you can, again, this is an area, like, to Joy's point, which is like, look, having these conversations and really creating an environment where people will talk to you openly so that you can get the information. And again, we're not killing the deal. We're just trying to properly evaluate. So,
Right. Exactly. All right. So some focus areas of diligence, which there are always many, but on the privacy and security side, on the slide here, we have a couple of those, high level questions that we mentioned, you might want to ask or anticipate being asked if you're on the other side, right? So again, the privacy notices and policies, I think that's a great point, Cynthia. You can figure out a lot based on if there is
quickly.
one.
Yes.
Sometimes there's not. And you're like, okay, then I don't need to ask any more questions.
I'm good here. Yeah, that's right.
So, starting there, very high level, it's kind of like a funnel. You start large and then you get smaller and smaller. Once you figure out, oh, they're either very highly regulated industry, like in the healthcare space, or they're a government contractor, things like that. You start to see very quickly the types of other diligence you need to do or risks that you need to consider or advise the rest of the deal team on. We already touched on sensitive data or biometric data, those additional controls or how they're being used, those additional risks that may pop up. And one thing that I don't have too much experience with is the children's data portion, because I have always really worked for companies and advised clients who have don't really market to children or collect data from minors. So Cynthia, if you have any kind of best practices on that focus area of diligence, it'd be great to hear.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think again, it gets to the point we made earlier, which is, is the company even aware that they're collecting children's data, right? Is it marketed to children? And then what steps have they taken in order to be compliant? I mean, from a company perspective, the issue with COPPA is that it is a first violation, first fine, right? Normally with the FTC, there has to be, you can't get fined on the first instance, right, of a violation. And COPPA is not like that. So that one is one, and the fines are unpredictable. It's hard to know right, what that could be. So I think that's one where if you know going in, right, that the company collects, children's data, you should probably bring in, that should be its own work stream in itself in order to really evaluate, have they done what is kind of the market standard for what that is. And I think the other difficulty with respect to children's data now, especially, is that you have, used to just be COPPA, but now you have different states that have been trying, right, to pass different laws, some successfully, some unsuccessfully. And so you need to widen your scope of potential sort of, state regulations that might also be in the crosshairs. So
that makes sense. And I think, the principles are kind of the same, right? Like we said, if there's highly regulated industry, if HIPAA's at issue, then, maybe you focus on this work stream, right? And you have additional expertise brought in. But you never know if you don't ask. So that's always a great place to start. Same with targeted advertising too. I think that is an area that is getting more and more attention. And I think regulators are very much interested in digitally enabled products and services, whether they're targeted to consumers only or in the business sense. So I think that one goes across industries. Even if you're not a social media company or have a retail product, targeted advertising still should be something that you have a pulse on when you're working through diligence.
Yeah, and I would say on that, what we're seeing are again, because of the changes in the sort of targeted on the sort of advertising front, right? With respect to regulations and scrutiny, what we're seeing are a lot of different companies that have sprung up in the last couple of years, few years maybe, that will provide kind of alternative ways to do targeted advertising. And so those agreements with those third parties, right, that are helping and enabling the advertising, those need to be scrutinized and understood. And I would say one thing too that sometimes it gets missed, right, in these focus areas of diligence are those vendor agreements or even commercial or customer agreements, right? And so that just made me think of that. And so I think, oftentimes it's a different team maybe that's looking at those, and they're looking at them for other issues. But again, making sure that you're having them reviewed by people who understand the data implications and the data sharing implications in those agreements. And so again, that's that cross communication, and it's making sure that you're really tying that off, because a lot of data privacy issues are not just, or security issues are not just with respect to the company itself and what they're doing, but it's how they're sharing the data with third parties. And so you need to make sure you've folded that in as part of the diligence and the evaluation of risk.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we actually recently, we do trainings, kind of normal or regular trainings on new issues that come up, and when thinking about diligence and the vendor agreements. I mean, not only for on the commercial side of things, they want to make sure everything is great, but you have people reviewing these agreements and asking for these agreements anyway. Typically, it's a great call out to maybe have an extra set of eyes to look at those a little bit further. Again, another focus area is governance practice. I think we look at traditionally governance more on the business side of things and corporate side of things, but in terms of data governance, I think that is becoming one of the issues that we think about a lot when we're talking about not only data-centric deals, but now in almost every deal. You just want to make sure, again, you can ask that high-level question: do you have someone in charge of or responsible for data protection or privacy, cybersecurity? Like, those are very benign questions, like you said, Cynthia, that I think could immediately give you a good picture of of the risk and where you need to maybe ask some more questions or have a conversation with the business about it.
Yeah, but yeah, 1000%. And also one question on that one too, sorry, I know you moved ahead, but one question on that too is asking who the person who is responsible for privacy and you know, and or security, or who do they report to? Right? Because that also gives you a good sense of the structure and sort of where the importance of these issues lies, and who would be concerned or would have kind of an overriding you know, sort of oversight, right, in any of how this kind of comes about. So I think that's just some key questions.
Good point. All right.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So I think, you know, we touched on this a little bit earlier. Cynthia, you have a breadth of experience in kind of advising clients on reps and warranties, among other things. But maybe you could just give a little overview of kind of like the highlights and the strategies you may have.
Yeah, so this is so this is something, like I said, you know, even, I mean, I said 10 years ago, I'm maybe even 6 years ago, right? I would say reps and warranties with respect to privacy and security were not as comprehensive as they are today. So this is really something that, I mean, you see you see the definition of processing now, right? Which is a GDPR term of, you know, you see those, that always just sort of makes me giggle because that's just, I mean, processing.
Everything, like,
Yeah.
might as
Right,
well.
it means everything, but you see it defined, right, in M&A agreement. So, I mean, it makes me giggle because I just kind of think like, wow, you know, look how much has changed.
True.
And so I think, you know, reps and warranties in an M&A transaction, in a you know, in any kind of strategic transaction, are the contractual tools that allow the parties in a transaction to place the risks of unknown circumstances upon the seller. And that's a really interesting point because sometimes we'll go back and forth. There's always an interplay between, so you've done the diligence, you have a sense, potentially, if you're the buy side, you have a sense of what the target's position is with respect to privacy. And you may think that they're not entirely compliant, you know, but the rep in the agreement is going to say that they are compliant with privacy and security laws, right, that apply to their business. I mean, that's a very standard rep. Now, and there's some tension there, obviously. If you're the target, if you're the seller, you may or may not be aware that, and that's a, you know, we won't debate what the issues around that. But you may or may not be aware that you know, that rep is not entirely true, right? And so there's a notion here and a tension sometimes around the truth, the full truth, and risk shifting. And ultimately, what you want to get to is a situation where obviously you want if you are the target, if you are the seller, you need to be entirely truthful, right? But that may, and so what that may change is that there's something called a disclosure schedule. And so on the disclosure schedule, you may disclose, let's say, something that is an exception to the rep, right? But generally, this is a risk shifting exercise. And the goal is to make sure that the entity, the company who has the greatest knowledge should bear the greatest burden with respect to whatever the rep, right, is. And then sometimes we create, you know, sometimes we create sort of special indemnities or special kind of, you know, like if in fact it isn't true, maybe there's a special indemnity around a potential violation of that rep, right? But these are, and I also see sometimes commercial attorneys struggle a little bit with reps and warranties in the sense that in a commercial transaction, like a licensing or a master services agreement, you might have in the body of the agreement, you have what look like reps, and they are kind of reps, in the sense that, you know, we've undertaken this, or we guarantee X. But then you'll have SLAs, or you'll have other ways that you can sort of capture non-compliance or a lapse in what they've guaranteed. And with an M&A transaction, it's a little different. You don't need the SLAs because these reps stand on their own and you can enforce them as such. So that's also just a little wrinkle between or just a difference. And so we see kind of different negotiation strategies are based on kind of people's backgrounds and how they look at these.
Makes sense. And then again, I think it's, you know, the theme I think here is like education, communication, like what can we actually do? You know, if this rep is not true, there are ways that we can protect ourselves, or, you know, clarify things like that. So it's a lot of the circle of education, I like to call it.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I do think back to your point, which is I think sometimes people are hesitant to disclose. And then, you know, if you are not compliant in a certain area, or the buyer is even hesitant to ask questions because they don't want to know. They think that, you know, ignorance is somehow, and look, ultimately, again, I've seen some pretty, you know, big issues, right? It ultimately never kills a deal, and that's not the point. But ignorance is not bliss. It's better to know going in. It's better to isolate what the risk is, create a special indemnity or a holdback, right? Or
Right.
something, or an earn out, or what, you know, whatever, in order to try to, you know, capture some of the potential financial potential losses post-close. So, and then to really dig into what the integration plan looks like. And then to, you know, your earlier point, Joy, then if there are parts of the risk, if there are certain buckets of data, or, you know, or different things that you decide ultimately you just don't want to transfer over, then you just leave it,
Right.
right? But if you don't know, then you will probably err on the side of taking everything.
Right.
And then it's hidden, essentially. So
Exactly.
yeah. So yeah, so really, you know, the way that we kind of look at this is, again, analyzing and identifying, you know, personal data usually is what we're focused on. That's been the focus traditionally of, you know, GDPR and the CCPA and a lot of state regulations. We obviously see that with respect to many of the AI regulations, you know, too. I mean, I think there's a plethora of regulations that are, even though the climate is changing, those regulations still exist. And many of them will continue to exist, right? So again, being aware of where personal data could show up and what that liability looks like. And then again, IT assets, and looking very closely at IT assets. And maybe that also means working with third parties, you know, working with a forensic security team. That's another third party who are not lawyers, but who have a higher degree of specialization in these kinds of technical issues. And then making sure that the agreements facilitate the transfer and continued processing of personal data. And again, we do that with reps and warranties and transfer documents. And then, you know, developing plans and timelines for providing updated notices and obtaining new consents as required. That's always a tricky one. I mean, I've been pulled into deals where people were very nervous because the privacy statement on the website did not provide for a potential change of hands of the data, right? That was subject to the privacy statement. So again, when you're drafting your privacy statement, make sure that you can amend it, you know, and make sure
Great
that,
tip.
yeah, I mean, but you forget. I mean, this is not,
True.
do. Like, it's so basic. It sounds basic, but you thinking about all of these big complicated, things, and is this the right bucket, and did I do the data mapping correctly? And then you're like, oh shoot. Or did you provide again for language with respect to a change of control, right? Which happens to all of us.
Right.
And then, just implementing the controls, managing permissions to mitigate heightened data security risk during the implementation phase. And I think we'd be remiss to say as well that I've also seen a number of transactions that get hit with a cyber incident in the middle
Mhm.
of an M&A transaction. And that is not an accident. Let's be real, people. Like, this is, yeah. So again, understanding that the transaction itself might create additional focus,
Right.
obviously, but also by hackers. So.
Great. Yeah. I think it's a great theme to keep in mind when you're asking these high level questions, right? It's not just because you're trying to poke holes in the strategy or things like that, but having implementation in mind, really, how do we deal with heightened security that's necessary for, whatever we may find, right? Or like you said, during the transaction, it's something to consider, right? 'Cause you're on a radar. You're not a blip on the radar anymore, depending on the type of the deal, but
Yeah, so the way that we look at, again, and I can't emphasize this enough, right? It's putting in place at least a backbone of an integration plan in the middle of of diligence. And we it just, look, the target, if you're on the buy side, the target is going to be the most receptive to giving information, frankly, before they've gotten their check. And so, you're taking advantage. I don't mean that in its worst form, but
taking
you
the
are,
opportunity.
yes, you're optimizing timing, and the desired outcome of each party. When you start to really drill down on these questions, earlier in the transaction, once these issues come up and you see that maybe you will need to create a more specific or a different kind of an integration, plan than what you originally intended. I will be honest, I still see transactions where the buyer is taking customer agreements, and what that means, right? And those customers are, let's say, consumer facing. I mean, they're individuals. It's not just B2B. And the data privacy team inside the company isn't even aware or made aware of the transaction until we're very, very close to signing. And I'm like, really? What? Hold on. So again, like, don't take it for granted that, to your point, Joy, don't take it for granted that everyone is sort of under the tent or knows what's going on. But these teams, your data privacy teams, and security, those teams need to know, right? And should be involved. So again, it's defining the key objectives, engaging the internal stakeholders, which, to Joy's point, like, sometimes you take a look at it and you say, you know what, honestly, like, we really only cared about one customer agreement instead of these 30. And these other 29 are going to create all kinds of risk that we're just not prepared to take. So we're just going to leave them. Right. Or the data, or a particular asset in a different context. So again, it just helps you isolate, why are we doing this deal and why does it make sense for us, dollars and cents, right? And have we tipped that balance by taking on too much risk? Again, communicating operating guidelines for pre and post close. And that's really important because it's a question of, and I've seen this with clients, even just in a regular customer onboarding situation where they have onboarded a customer and moved data somewhere where they said they wouldn't, right? And the reason they did it was because their standard protocol was to do X, and they just hadn't taken into consideration that they needed to do Y, right? And so again, making sure that if you're making a change, if you're saying, nope, we're not going to keep this, or we're going to make sure that this sits over here in a sort of holding pattern until we've, established a different protocol, making sure that you're communicating that across the team, and not just the lawyers, but engineering and right. And so I think that's another thing that's just really important, making sure that everyone is on board and there's a real sort of meeting of the minds on that.
Yeah.
And then I think establishing a centralized process. And yes, I mean, I think those are really the kind of key. And communicating that to the target. A lot of times,
That's important.
I mean, that's so funny, but sometimes I think that, I mean, you need to think, obviously the timing of that is important, but making sure that they're on board and understand. I mean, look, the upside is that everyone is happy post close. I mean, that's what you're aiming for. And oftentimes those employees, that founder is moving over to the buyer. So again, making sure that is all being communicated in the right timing and to the right people, so that you don't get resistance at the last minute just because someone wasn't made aware.
Right. Or, dropping little breadcrumbs throughout the process, right? Letting them know you might have a cybersecurity protocol or protocol for your government controlled data. Those kind of things that I think genuinely and naturally come up during the diligence conversations based on the information that you're sharing. So agree that is a very important thing. And then practical tips. These are, I feel like you look at these and you're like, yeah, okay, I know this, right? But for me, at least, you can get really bogged down in some of the details that you want to pivot to. Oh, wait, have I done this? Have I checked this? So again, identifying those highly regulated, specialized, subjects like children's data and minor data. Those are always, it's a great reminder to have on your checklist, right? Even if you don't think that's part of the program or part of the plan, just cross it off your list.
Yes, no, that's right. Well, and I would say have a good list, right?
Yeah.
Like make sure that you're asking your outside counsel to give you an updated list, right?
Yep.
Or like what are sort of the recent issues that you're seeing or trends that you're seeing, or especially if you are in a particular industry that's highly regulated, or you're moving into an industry that's maybe a new business line or something a little different, lean on your outside counsel to help give you the tools that get you a kind of a better position from the get-go, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, as you know, I do this with you all the time. I'm like, Cynthia, every year it's like, let's just rewind. Is there something new? But
yeah.
Also, like a benchmarking perspective, because you see more than I do, diversity of types of deals and industries being in-house. It's also just like a good like pulse check of, is there any new trend you're seeing? It may cascade down to, the manufacturing industry or the healthcare industry that we're dealing with. So it's always a good pulse check to check in with your external counsel.
Totally. Oh, wait, I was going to go back. I was going to say the other thing is look to see this as a conversation, right? I tell people on my team when we do the phone, we do diligence calls, right? With the target, for example, and I say, look at this as a conversation. Like you should be asking open-ended questions so that you get a response that's not just a yes or a no. You're getting some details that help you get a better sense of sort of where the questions should go next, right? So.
And again, the integration plan, right? It's never we have, and I think there are several iterations of this, but that I've seen over the course of my career, but always kind of like a template that you can then tailor as you're going through diligence and kind of keeping things in mind if something comes up. And that's been really effective for me. One, making sure that I don't forget to check something, or two, I can also use it as an education piece of like, hey, we're going to have to think about this on the integration side. It's not a deal breaker by any means, but it might cost the money, right? So just think about it.
Oh, yeah, no. And what I find too is that when you have a template or you have something ready, you have those questions ready, you have that kind of the bullet points ready. I mean, most of the time I mean, I know I get this request and I know I'm sure, I know this happens to you too, where you get the request and they say, okay, but we need this like in 15 minutes, right? Or, hey, we're headed into a meeting in a couple of hours. Do you think you could put together like some high level questions on? So again, what if you've got something in your back pocket that even if it's not perfect, if it at least outlines, right, the high level questions and issues, and you create value right away, which increases the likelihood that they're going to ask you the next time, right? And hopefully with a little more than a couple hours notice, but
Fingers crossed.
yeah.
I think that's our last slide.
Yeah.
Yeah, our last slide. Well, honestly, there are common themes, and I think no matter what industry you're in or the type of deal that you're doing, we've already kind of identified, the communication, education, kind of just doing what you can to plan. And I always look at it like this funnel, right? If you start very broad and then see where you need to go, could be really helpful mindset to walk into these deals and strategic partnerships with.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think look at this as a conversation, right? Like you said, Joy, it's education, but because that's a conversation with your business team, right? And with whether that's your corporate dev team or, or different business teams or business units that are particularly focused on strategic growth. Then, having those conversations and it's not a question of like the sky is falling. It's a question of, hey, why don't you just loop me in? Because it's just going to be a lot, everything, everyone wants a successful integration, right? And that's the goal here, right? It's not a question again of like killing the deal or penalizing someone for non-compliance or, right? The goal is that you want everyone is super excited, which is part of the reason I like doing M&A work. Everyone is super excited. Yay, we're going to do all these cool things together. We just made this big investment. And if it doesn't work out, it's a big disappointment, right?
Yeah, totally.
And data is increasingly important to that successful sort of, right, merger of two companies.